We're starting the second year CBA. The heading that you're going to be working on is called Graphics and Geometry in the World Around Us. So what that means is you're going to pick a topic and you're going to break down that topic and identify all the different types of graphics. So graphics, for example, might be axial symmetry. Graphics might be a development of a box, and geometry in the world around us. So geometry is to do with angles and shapes and patterns. So the midpoint of a line would be something to do with geometry. So you're going to find all the different aspects of graphics and geometry in the world around us. We're as well to just jump straight into a couple of examples of what you're talking about. So this is one example of work. This is exploring graphics and geometry in food packaging containers. So basically what was done here, you can see there was primary research done, but the main project, the presentation of the project, is breaking down all different types of food packaging into technical graphics. So in other words, identifying different shapes. For example, cylinders, you might have a cone shape. Then you might get into developments, so you take a box and you develop it out, and then you might get into some more complicated things. For example, here on the maple syrup bottle, things like a truncated sphere, so where you had a sphere that was cut off. You have a triangular based prism. Back to our SolidWorks, you've got an extrude, you've got axial symmetry, and so they've taken all the different packaging they could find and broken it down into the different types of graphics and geometry. Second example, so geometry in sports equipment. So in other words, this is where they took all different pieces of sports equipment and broke them down. And again, it's the same kind of idea. You might have symmetry, you might have a revolve, so that's back to the SolidWorks. You've got cone shapes, you've got tangent circles, so in other words, circles touching each other. You've got right angles in a goalpost, you've got lines of intersection, you've got a 90-degree angle, so perpendicular angles. You've got cylinders, you've got a development of a cylinder, and again, it's all breaking sports equipment down into the type of graphics that can be seen in it. Third type then is something like exploring geometry in silage trailers. So somebody took the topic of just one piece of equipment and then they tried to break it down into silage equipment, or sorry, into all the different graphics. This is a little bit more complicated because it's only one object. It's going to be a lot more difficult to find graphics and geometry in just one piece of equipment. Here they should probably have widened it out to exploring geometry in farm machinery, and you could look at almost anything there to do with farm machinery. So those are kind of three simple examples of what you can choose. We'll go through basically how you're going to choose a theme first. There's two important things to think of when you're choosing the theme. First one is you need to choose a theme that you're going to have some interest in. And the second one is you need to choose a theme that you think there's going to be lots of examples of geometry in it. So for example, if you love computer games, it might be very difficult to find examples of geometry in computer games. So in other words, you mightn't pick something like that. Even though you like the topic, there's no point doing a geometry in computer games because it's going to be very hard to find examples of graphics and geometry in that. So you need to widen out the topic. So I've given some examples for you to work from. They all basically start with graphics and geometry. So graphics and geometry in cooking equipment, you could talk about graphics and geometry in nature, lots of graphics and geometry in that, graphics and geometry in the beauty industry, graphics and geometry in farm machinery, graphics and geometry in space. You could talk about graphics and geometry at home, which would be a good one because there's lots of different geometry at home. Musical instruments, so graphics and geometry in musical instruments. Food containers, we kind of seen an example of that. Sports equipment, we've seen an example of that. Then you can pick things like graphics and geometry in cars, motorcycles. You could pick a specific sport, so if you had a massive interest in golf, you could pick golf, for example. But the first thing you're going to do is choose a theme. We're going to choose three possible themes, so you're not just going to choose the first thing that comes into your head. Second part then is we're going to explore graphic geometry used in products and artifacts. So in other words, here we're going to go through all the different examples of the geometry that you've learned so far. And I've done up a list so you can see them. In the list then you can see real life examples of graphics and geometry. So a rotation, we studied rotation a couple of months back. Rotation, when you open a door, you've got rotation of a door hinge. When you flatten out food packaging, it's development. So we studied development, so that's a practical use of developments. Lots of football stadiums are in the shape of an ellipse, so to make it curved and so that everyone can see, it's an elliptical shape. You have axial symmetry in a guitar, so we'll say the head of the guitar is in the shape of an axial symmetry, meaning one side is exactly the same as the other. When you hit a golf ball or kick a football or any type of ball, you create a parabola. And then we've got lots of different types of geometry. If you get into machinery and engines, so one example would be the threads of a bolt are based on a very specific type of geometry, which is called helix. It's the first two parts that we're going to be working on at home. So the first one is we're going to pick a theme. The second one is we're going to identify all the different parts or all the different examples of geometry we can think of. And then when we get back to school, we're going to create a collage of our work and then we're going to present it. In the second video, I'll go talk about how we start doing the research.